Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Kristen Cline. She's a professional development practitioner and emergency nurse. Today's Kevin MD article is America's ER Crisis, Why the System is Collapsing from Within. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for publishing my article. As you know, I started out the article about the Pitt, which is kind of having a cultural moment. Anytime that our healthcare, medicine, especially in a really lifelike way, whenever that's kind of in the public forefront of the public's mind, I think it's really important that we capitalize on that. And for me, I've been an emergency nurse for almost 20 years. I've worked in emergency departments of all different sizes. I was a flight nurse for about 6 years, and so I was in and out of facilities all over the country. So I feel like I've had a really nice, top-down view of hospitals and emergency departments over the past 2 decades. And I liked the Pitt because it was realistic. It was almost too realistic in that being in that world for so long, it was predictable. I kind of could see what was coming. I knew what was coming. And so I was impressed by the attention to detail that they took to really kind of, learn the procedures, learn the realistic way that emergency departments work. So that way they could, depict them somewhat realistically to the lay people of the country. And as good as a job as it did, I didn't think that it went far enough, actually. It felt very controlled. The chaos felt very kind of slow paced. And I felt like I really wanted to express to people, especially with the big, beautiful bill passing, which has a lot of stuff in it that could potentially affect our life in healthcare, affect the way hospitals work, affect our patients' lives. And so I felt like I had a really kind of unique perspective of what has the hospitals been like over the last, 20, 25 years? What do we look like now in a post-pandemic world? And I think what the public doesn't understand post-pandemic is that it's so much worse than it used to be. And that was what I felt like the Pitt didn't really depict the true insanity of emergency departments now, how busy they are, how overcrowded they are, how we're taking care of patients right now in every space we can find. I mean, we're cramming chairs in corners, we're setting up hallway beds, we're seeing people in the lobby, just trying to get through patients, just trying to see the patients that we can. And we get so backed up by the hospital processes, right? We have hospital overcrowding. Right now, hospitals are running at 85% capacity, which leaves us no surge capacity as a nation. We've been running at our surge capacity since the pandemic started. So we really we don't have a lot of wiggle room for our stressed healthcare system. And you start with hospital overcrowding. We have rehab centers and acute care, post-acute facilities closing due to losing their Medicare dollars. And so there's less places to discharge to. 2 years ago, I was a trauma program manager. And so, managing the patient's experience from the traumatic events, all through their rehabilitation journey. And there were some of our trauma patients who would sit inpatient for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, just looking for a bed, looking for a place to go, looking for a way to rehab. And so as we get kind of backlogged from the post-acute facilities, the inpatient beds, half the patients in the ER now are inpatients waiting for an inpatient bed. And so we're not even really doing a lot of emergency care in the emergency department because we're doing so much inpatient care. We're taking care of patients who don't have a bed yet. And the care that they're getting is not the care that they should be getting. And that's no fault of the emergency department. The emergency department is built to take care of emergent conditions, right? Acute injuries, acute illnesses. And From the opposite side of the healthcare system, we have the lack of primary care, the lack of availability of primary care. We have the lack of primary care outside regular kind of working hours. And so that really leaves people with no place to go apart from the emergency department. And so we're really kind of squished. And it feels like in a lot of ways, the modern emergency department is kind of this like knife point. We're balanced on this kind of knife point edge of, are we going to make it? Are we not? Every day feels very precarious. And for a lot of us frontline healthcare workers who have been kind of, holding the line for a really long time, it's really tough out there. It's tough in the ways it always has been, and it's tough in a whole lot of new ways that we haven't really trained for.
So you started, of course, mentioning the TV show The Pitt, for those who aren't familiar, the HBO show that has been highly acclaimed as being very realistic, but sometimes you're saying that it's not realistic enough, right? And a lot of the symptoms that you described just previously is leading to things like burnout and work staff shortages, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, right? So what would you do to fix this? Is it simply just a matter of money? From your vantage point as an emergency nurse over the decades, like how can we fix something like this?
I've kind of given up hope that a solution is going to come from somewhere else, from the top down, especially. I think the thinking that's happening at the top of healthcare right now, especially we have all these MBAs who have kind of entered healthcare administration. And so you have a lot of people making business decisions, not patient-centered decisions. And so I think change in the system is going to have to come from the ground up. Those of us who are the frontline healthcare workers, if we want to change it, we really are going to have to be the ones to lead that change. And so for me, in a perfect world, so much of that starts with educational support. I feel very lucky. I'm in a system that has really solid, robust educational support. It's an academic system, and it's one of the top ones in the country. I'm really lucky to be here, but it's the only hospital I've been at in the past 5 years that has given really any consideration to education, continuing education for providers. The providers that were trained during the pandemic, they had a really degraded training experience because they weren't able to get into hospitals to do clinical rotations. And so, for a nursing student, let's say you are supposed to have, somewhere around 600 clinical hours by the time you graduate. And so you had nurses and our physician residents as well, who for the past few years struggled to kind of get in that clinical time. And so they're graduating less prepared than they have been. I think physicians and nurses that are graduating now are less prepared than they have been in the past. And so what that means for hospitals is that we have to take the responsibility to meet that training gap, right? We know that it's there. And so if I know that my workforce is not prepared, then it's my job to get them prepared so that they can operate at the level that they need to be at. And hospitals are not really doing that, and they're not prepared to do it. Hospitals are not thinking, the hospital leadership is thinking, well, it's not our job to educate them. They went to school. That's what they went to school for. But with the speed that healthcare changes and the acuity of patients that we have, I think patients are much sicker now. I think hospitals have to take the lead in saying, we're going to support your transition. We're going to give you the tools that you need to make this adequate transition. Because at least with nurses, what we're seeing is that a new nurse within 3 years, somewhere in the high 90% of those nurses are looking to leave the bedside. They're getting turned and burned. They're there for a couple of years, and then they're realizing this isn't for me. This isn't the way that I thought it was going to be. And one of the ways that I talk about in the article, and this seems to be the part of my article that's really resonated with our audiences, is the workplace violence aspect of it. The character in The Pitt that really resonated the most for me, obviously because she's a nurse, in a lot of ways, is Dana, the charge nurse. She, I felt like, was a very realistic character. And the most realistic part was when she got punched in the face, got a skull fracture, and still stayed at work, had to work, couldn't leave. And I think lots of us in healthcare have gone to work sick, gone to work injured. And certainly lots of us have gone to work, been assaulted at work, and then had to stay there. And so that's, I think, the next step of this equation is we really have to tackle the problem of workplace violence. Healthcare organizations have been lobbying for these protections for a really long time, but we haven't made a whole lot of headway. I've been to DC, I've been to my state houses, talking to senators and representatives, sharing one-on-one the stories, what has happened to me, the times that I've been assaulted. And those stories are really powerful if we can tell them. And so we have to get the public's to help us advocate for ourselves there. Healthcare organizations are really hesitant to spend money on things that would mitigate violence, like security in the waiting room, security that's posted down in the emergency department and visible, metal detectors, all of these things that help make our practice environment more safe that hospitals aren't willing to invest in. And so I think we really need to challenge the healthcare industry to deal with this problem, because there's really no other sector where violence is tolerated, where violence is even expected. You can't go to Walmart and assault the checkout clerk, and the clerk doesn't have to, finish bagging your groceries and then bring them out to your car. That person gets arrested and you're allowed to clock out and get taken care of. You get something for your pain. But in healthcare, we don't even allow people to clock out and deal with their injuries if they're assaulted by a patient. Sometimes, I've had scenarios where I've had to take care of the patient that assaulted me for multiple days. Like in an ICU, I've had to, be stuck in a room with them for 12-hour shifts at a time after that patient has hurt me. And so I think that, one, us as healthcare workers, when incidents like those happen to us, we need to have really good boundaries and say, no, I'm not okay, right? I need to get this taken care of. So I'm going to clock out. I'm going to go to employee health and get checked over and get this documented as a workplace injury. I'm going to go and see a physician and get this taken care of and do what I need to do to take care of myself. Because part of the reason that hospitals can make this a lower priority is that we make it a low priority for them, right? If we're willing to work while we're injured or hurt, then they don't have to really do anything about it. And the system can kind of control itself, because then you have, if you don't see your peers, going to get their injuries taken care of, if you don't see your peers making a violence incident a big deal, or if you report it and nothing happens, you're much less likely to report incidents in the future.
So you mentioned that a lot of hospitals, they're not willing to spend on the resources for security for healthcare staff. Now, what are some of the reasons for that?
It's very expensive. What I've been told by some lobbyists that I know in DC is that the hospital associations are lobbying against these protections for us. So when we're going in there and saying we need these protections, the healthcare associations are coming in behind us and saying, well, but we really can't afford to do it. Healthcare is already so expensive. It will be too expensive for us to make the changes that we need to staff to a point to where if somebody gets hurt and needs to go home, they can. We're not, staffing at the very edge of, how we can safely take care of patients. It's really an investment in better training. We get sent to, CPI, some of these other de-escalation, these de-escalation activities that don't really do the trick, right? They teach us kind of how to keep basic safety, how to kind of tell if a patient is escalating, but we don't teach people what to do if you do get injured. What are the next steps after that? We kind of leave that murky for a good reason. And I think the second part of that is we have to figure out how to have law enforcement help us with this, right? I've been told by law enforcement that this is what I signed up for, that it's my part of my job to get assaulted.
Wow.
And I'm not going to take the report because the person won't even show up. And so it doesn't matter. And so what the outside system tells us is that we don't matter. What happens to us doesn't matter. And so that, to me, I see that's a huge leak of staff, because if I come to work, I feel like I don't matter. I feel like I'm just another body, which administration looks at nursing that way. A nurse is a nurse is a nurse. They're not valuing longevity. They're not valuing the wisdom that comes from, staying at the bedside. They just see it as, we'll just, fill that up again, but they don't realize the skill, the wisdom, the knowledge that you're losing when we have so much turnover. That means there's less Danas out there, right? There's less Danas who can handle everything, because the younger generation is, looking at the landscape and being like, this is crazy. I can't stay here. And so for people's own safety, for their own mental health, you have to take care of yourself. Sure. But hospitals are going to have to take it seriously, right? They're going to have to take staffing seriously. They're going to have to take safety seriously, which costs money. It does upfront. But I think the benefit is that we will have a steady healthcare workforce that is able to take care of our population, our aging population. As our population gets older, there's something like 40,000 people aging into Medicare every day. So the need for healthcare clinicians is only going to go up. Sure, but if we have this this leaky sieve of the way hospitals work, we can't get on top of these systemic eras, because we're just kind of spinning our wheels with the basics the whole time.
Sure. We're talking to Kristen Cline, emergency nurse and professional development practitioner. Today's Kevin MD article is America's ER Crisis, Why the System is Collapsing from Within. So Kristen, despite all these dark clouds that is really haunting our emergency system, maybe we could end on a positive note. Like, why do you keep doing what you're doing? And what are some words of inspiration you could share with other frontline clinicians in terms of why they should pursue patient care in the emergency department setting?
It's a great question. And I will say, there's really a lot that keeps me going back. Part of what I do in my work now as a staff development practitioner, I'm an educator for the nurses in the emergency department. So I'm taking all my experience and infusing it into the new nurses that I get to work with. And so something that's really uplifting for me is seeing the nurses and the physician residents that are coming into hospitals. They still have hope. People are still going into this for the right reasons. And so it surprises me that people still are coming out of nursing school really excited to do it and really excited to take care of people. And so I'm hopeful that, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, these generations coming after us, they're still excited about helping people. They're a caring and more empathetic generation. And so it's really nice to get to work with talented, really passionate healthcare workers. And the other kind of bright spot for me is the patient interactions. You still have an opportunity every time you interact with somebody to kind of make a human connection with them. And it's challenging because people are more frustrated now. People are kind of meaner sometimes. People are more difficult to deal with. And so I think it's even more important now for our practice that we look for those ways that we can just take care of each other, little ways we can take care of our patients just to try to make a connection with them, a human connection with them. That's what keeps you in healthcare, I feel like, is, connecting with the people around you, supporting your fellow coworkers, helping people where you can, helping to make their day better. And I think if we can learn good boundaries as a profession, if we learn to leave work at work, when we clock out, if we can leave work at work and go home and then have kind of a rich home life where we're taking care of ourselves and we're, doing things that we enjoy. So that way, when we're coming to work, we're present, we're able to be there and, be the best version of ourselves. And if you have a bad day, you can start over next time. We always have opportunities to get better. And I do feel like the changes that are coming in healthcare are positive. They're going to hurt, I think, because we know we can't go on this way for too much longer. But I do think once we kind of break the system, what we build from that will be so much better. I think the things that the pandemic broke were going to break. They needed to break. They weren't working anyways. And so something positive that I see about everything kind of falling apart around us is that gives us an opportunity to build it up the way we want it to be. And so that's kind of why I wanted to write the article, to kind of rally people to say that we don't like the way it is right now, but we are healthcare. It's made of us. And so if we don't like the way it is right now, we have the power to change it. We just have to be engaged and be willing to do it and be dedicated to our patients and to our profession and to our colleagues. So I still go to work every day being very energized by the chances that I get to make a difference. And I think there's lots of clinicians out there that feel the same way. And so if we're all out there giving our best, I think there is hope for us.
Kristen, thank you so much for sharing your story, time, and insight. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.